Okay, so because I know you guys love me, I feel empowered to step out on the tightrope a little bit and explore a topic with you. My fear in writing the sermon that I have for today is that it might come across as a college lecture on philosophy, and we're going to work hard to make sure that's not what I do, because that's not my intention. But I want to share some thoughts that I have come to discover in my own life, and especially in the forgiveness work that I do. And we're going to invite a guy named David Richo to kind of lead our discussion at the first part of our time together in the sermon this morning. The title of his book, The 5 Things We Cannot Change, and the Happiness We Find by Embracing Them. First, everything changes and ends. Things do not always go according to plan. Life is not fair. Pain is a part of life. People are not loving and loyal all the time. I want to focus on the second part of his book title, the subtitle, putting the emphasis on the other syllable, as I often want to do. The happiness we find by embracing them. The happiness we find by embracing them. So, Richo says that there are 5 unavoidable givens, 5 immutable facts that come to visit us many times over. Everything changes and ends. Things do not always go according to plan. Life is not always fair. Pain is a part of life. People are not loving all the time. These are the core challenges that we all face, but too often we live in denial of these facts. We behave as if somehow these givens aren't always in effect or not applicable to all of us. Maybe they're applicable for other people, but certainly not for ourselves. But when we oppose these 5 basic truths, we resist reality, and life then becomes an endless series of disappointments, frustrations, and sorrows. In the forgiveness trainings that I do, I always start out in the first class by saying, kind of summarizing all of this by saying, the biggest problem with life is that none of us are going to get out alive. And so, what do we do with that? On the one hand, we might be in denial about that. We avoid it. We don't want to talk about it. I've known people who have grieved the loss of loved ones for decades. And that's not a bad thing. But it's unprocessed grief, because it's so hard to get over the reality that everyone will die someday. Dr. King said, and I've quoted this before, just as every one of us has a birth date, so also will we have a death date. The real question is, what are we going to do with that dash that separates those 2 dates? That's what I want to talk about today. I don't have a whole lot to say about denial because, well, what can you say about denial? It's not engagement. I have one pithy quotation that I think is from Mark Twain. He said that denial is not just a river in Egypt. Yeah. On the other hand, we have the other extreme, I would say. We have what I will present as the absurdism of Albert Camus, the French philosopher who came to prominence in the mid-20th century. As an undergraduate in philosophy at Wofford College with a particular interest and emphasis in existentialism, I had the privilege of reading most of his works. And kind of depressing, right?
Yeah.
Camus wants to claim that life, in many respects, is absurd. Now, I don't want to disrespect a giant of the Western philosophical tradition by saying that's all that he had to say. There was so much more that he had to say. But his idea is that life at the extreme can be absurd. Remember, his work was done against the backdrop of World War II. He was working in Paris in the aftermath of the Nazi occupation of Paris, and many of the atrocities of the Holocaust were coming fully into light about this time. So it's understandable to think about life as absurd. I have a quotation. The absurd lies in the juxtaposition between the fundamental human need to attribute meaning to life and the unreasonable silence of the universe in response. Remember at that time, we had Elie Wiesel, the survivor of the Holocaust, who wrote a little book called Night. And in that book, Night, his question was, where was God? Why was God silent? There's a lot of studies about the mindset of people in the Holocaust camps. And in one place, I think it was Treblinka, some of the folks who were in the camp decided to put God on trial. So you can understand Camus' understanding, his unnerving feeling about the unreasonable silence of the universe. One of his essays is about the myth of Sisyphus. This is an image of Sisyphus painted by the Renaissance artist Titian in the year 1549. It's from Venice. Sisyphus, as many of you know, it's a very popular myth, was punished by the gods at the time. The backstory about Sisyphus that we don't often remember is that Sisyphus had this bright idea that he was going to kill the god of death, and so that we would be immortal and no human beings would die. And the gods didn't take lightly to that, and so they punished him. And his punishment was, as you probably will remember, rolling a rock, or as Titian understands it, carrying a rock up a huge hill only to put it down, and it rolls down again. And he has to go down. His punishment is to spend eternity doing this thing. Oh my gosh. How awful to think about that. But Camus likes to say that even in spite of all this, Sisyphus was defiant in that he laughed. And that was his transcendence. The tragic hero, Sisyphus, transcends his dreadful fate through laughter, and not just any laughter, scorn. That's how Camus interpreted Sisyphus's laughter. So I'm not too big on either of those, denial or absurdity. So let's go to meaning making. Meaning making. Making peace with what is, accepting what is, making sense out of it, creating meaning, building community around the meanings that we make, but facing the hard realities of life. I used to, when I met with couples who were doing premarital counseling in preparation for their wedding day, sometimes I would say, hey, by the way, the only conflict-free existence is death. And they go, what? I thought we were here to plan a wedding. It's not a matter of whether we're going to have conflict. That's a reality of life. That lets us know we're alive. It's not a matter of whether we're going to have it, but how we work through it with grace and dignity and kindness and compassion. These are the realities we want to pursue, I think. So, meaning making, I go to the Stoics often, and Epictetus said that happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. So there are two kinds of things. Things you can change, things you can't change. Nick was so kind to read for us the serenity prayer this morning. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom to know the difference. There's some pertinent Stoic principles I want to just mention. You know, one of their sayings was memento mori, remember your death. Remember your death because that's when you start to live. When you realize you only got a finite amount of days, you figure out that you don't want to waste these precious days, this precious gift, on stuff that's not important. It helps us sort through what's important and not important. They also had a saying, premeditatio malorum. We premeditate what could go wrong. Basically playing, a what could go wrong game so that we prepare ourselves when something does go wrong. It's not the kind of thing where we're looking for things to go wrong because we like things to go wrong. We anticipate that some things in life will go wrong, and therefore I'll plan for that. Like someday I will die, so I make sure I have a will in place that my loved ones don't have to ask questions and fight the government over what I leave behind, right? So it's premeditatio malorum. We talk about, David Richo had another quotation I want to share with you. He says that yes is the brave ally of serenity, while no is the scared accomplice of anxiety. And we have the decision. We have a decision that we can make with regard to our lives and our journey through this life and our relationships with our loved ones. And it could be a yes, serenity, acceptance of what is that we can't change, or it could become the no that creates anxiety. When we say no to something that will happen, we're arguing with fate. We're arguing with life. And last time I checked, whenever I do that, life always wins. You know, it's one of the things in our forgiveness training is that when something bad happens to us that we didn't want to have happen, or something didn't happen that we were counting on happening, we have grief over that, and we grieve that. But then we take it a little further. We create a grievance. And that means we're looking for someone else to blame. You know, I didn't get that job because, well, they had a favorite. Or they treated me this way because they had it in for me from the beginning. I had to learn all this stuff the hard way. We call this unenforceable rules in the forgiveness work. So let me ask you a question with regard to unenforceable rules. Have you ever tried to get a squirrel to eat an acorn with a knife and fork? Good luck with that. You probably hadn't, because you realize that a squirrel is not going to use proper table manners when he's eating an acorn, or when he's raiding the bird feed basket on our porch, and the whole family. We had like 5 the other day. It was outrageous. They enjoyed themselves. Unenforceable rules. That's when we are not able to acknowledge that certain things will happen, the 5 things or other things. There's a 6th thing, by the way. We can't change the past. Anybody ever tried to change the past? Oh man, I have an advanced degree in that. But I didn't graduate because you can't do it. You know? Try to change the past. Well, unenforceable rules are these ideas that we create in our minds to make peace with something that we can't deal with. Whether it's something that happened that we didn't want to have happen, or something that didn't happen we were counting on happening. For example, here's an unenforceable rule. You probably have some too. I'd like to hear them. Expecting an habitually late person to show up on time is an unenforceable rule. I know. My sister is like that. I've told you about her before, and I love my sister. But it gives us all a chuckle. Whenever we were going to meet for dinner, we'd tell her 7 o'clock, and she'd call and say, I'm on my way, which means I'm on my way to the shower. Then I'll make coffee, check my emails, and I'll see you in a bit. So then we backed it up. We started telling her we're going to meet at 6, and we'd meet at 7. And that kind of worked out until she discovered what we were doing. You know. But what are we going to do? We love our sister. We're so happy she shows up when she does. And what a blessing it is. So making peace with what is, accepting what is, invigorates us to embrace the life we've been given. You know that quotation from Joseph Campbell, you have to let go of the life that you plan so that you can embrace the life that has shown up for you. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. You know, if you can't change your mind, change your attitude, Maya Angelou said. That's pretty cool. It's a mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Right? This all ties in with the 7th principle of Unitarian Universalism, in my opinion. It's a respect for the interdependent web of experience of which we all are a part. Because when we acknowledge that we are finite individuals, and that someday we will have a death date, just as we have a birthday, when we acknowledge that life isn't always fair, as every one of us has experienced, I'm sure, some more so than others, when we acknowledge that life is not free of pain, I'm discovering that as I age and my hip has been hurting me, you know. When we acknowledge all this, we connect with one another in our common humanity, that interdependent web of all being. And together, we are able to build a life and an inspiration for our hearts to face the things we can't change and to transcend them, not with a laughter of scorn, but with a heart of joy. Because what we have right now together, you and I, this fellowship with our family members, is absolutely precious. There will not be an absence of pain in our lives. Every one of us will die. You know, all the 5 hard sayings that we've heard. But what's important is to put the emphasis on the other syllable and to see that is what makes what we have right now, this minute, so absolutely precious. So absolutely precious that we don't want to waste a drop of it. And that's called acceptance. It's called forgiveness. It's called maturity. Taking responsibility for our lives and for each other. It's a powerful thing. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will have strength. Realize this and you will have strength. Remember the work of another concentration camp survivor, Viktor Frankl. He said one of the most important things for modern positive psychology, I think, and that is you can take everything away from a person. You can take every single thing away from a person except for one thing: his attitude toward what you did. You know? So we have choices that we can make. For example, for me, I felt that I didn't get the support that I needed after my work at Ground Zero in New York after 9/11. And I was bitter about that. And I doubled down on that bitterness. And, you know, you can get bitter or you can get better. I learned that the hard way too. I was circling the drain. Then I heard the quotation from Nelson Mandela, that not to forgive is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemies to die from it. I drank a lot of that poison. And if I'm honest with you, a lot of the times it tastes really good. I could always find someone to play Ain't It Awful with me, that popular board game. Or watch reruns of How Horrible Is My Life, one of the popular series on Netflix. I just made that up. Or we can acknowledge that life is finite, that we have our challenges, accept what is, and move forward, yearning for what we wish to see. The way we unwind our unenforceable rules is to stop demanding that certain things be. I no longer demand that someone show up on time for a meeting that I have. I don't demand it. I don't add shoulds or oughts to it, but I now will say, I hope that person shows up on time, including myself, by the way. Or I wish the meeting will start on time. But if it doesn't start on time, no biggie, really, right? When you look at the whole scheme of things, that's not such a big deal. So acceptance and making peace with what is where we are, I think, today, where I want us to be. And it's about humility, not humiliation. Those are extremes. Humility, humiliation is the ego's woundedness and the sense of dignity and worth that has been challenged. Humility is acknowledging the root word of humus, of the earth, grounded, connected, in relationship. C.S. Lewis said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. When we're consumed by the 5 things we can't change, that's our ego trying to deny the reality that we are finite individuals and creatures. When we're able to let go of that and horizontally embrace our loved ones near and far, then that's a little bit more like humility, acknowledging the connection. It's not about us as individuals, it's about us as a community. Humility means accepting reality with no attempt to outsmart it. That's kind of what I wanted to say today. There was a book that was published in 1973. The guy's name is Ernst Becker, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's called The Denial of Death. And he goes through a whole book's worth of scenarios talking about the ways that we deny the reality of death. And that attempt at transcendence really is where we get into trouble. When we try to be like Sisyphus and take death away from the human race, we get in trouble with the gods. But if we acknowledge it and befriend it even in some way, for hopefully its visit many years into the future, then we find a peace about what's real and about what is. And we all thrive together in that. I think that I want to share with you how I think this connects with the 7th principle. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. It's a quotation from the Reverend Forrest Gilmore, who's the executive director of the Shalom community. Our 7th principle may be our Unitarian Universalist way of coming to fully embrace something greater than ourselves, the interdependent web, expressed as the spirit of life, the ground of all being, the oneness of all existence, the community-forming power, the process of life, the creative force. It can help us develop that social understanding of ourselves that we and our culture so desperately need. It's a source of meaning to which we can dedicate our lives. And here's a song that I picked out that I think gives us a lot of encouragement along these lines. So I'm not sure I succeeded in my goal in having this not be a lecture in philosophy, and so forgive me for that. But I hope I've been able to share some thoughts about the reality of the finitude of life, and that not being a downer, but something to acknowledge so that we rejoice. Camus got this so right. He wrote a novel called The Plague, and in that novel he talks about the just horrific conditions of Algeria, a fictional account of a plague. And he goes through all these graphic details, as he's really good at doing, to make basically this point, as I understand it anyway, that we all have the plague. We all have the plague of finitude. Once we realize that, then our life begins. And then we thrive together. We build a new way. We grow from that in community one with another, in our compassion for each other, in our kindness towards one another, in our community, our circle of love. We find our sustenance. So let's have a listen. This is a great song. I love the music of a lot of the Unitarian fellowships around the country are doing such awesome stuff.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these vibes. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we cry. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these vibes. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
And to wrap the sermon portion up, I have a reading from the book of Philippians, chapter 4. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And now